Kevin Key is the Canada Research Chair of Digital Humanities and a history professor at Brock University. Kevin is the director of the Simulating History Lab, where he works on combining history and humanities computing on a number of projects.
For the longest time, we've been talking about history in the university, when really what we've been talking about is history texts. And with the introduction of computers, it's fundamentally changed our lives in general, but it hasn't necessarily made an impact on the discipline. It really should, and what we're trying to do in the Simulating History Research Lab is bring history and computing together. Our work here is focused on identifying best practices for history simulations in 3 areas. So the first set of best practices is focused on content and the acquisition of knowledge. How exactly can we ensure that in a history simulation, a student learns what we want him or her to learn? It's not as easy as it sounds, because in a game that's focused on entertainment, there are certain conventions that are used. But when your goal is learning, you have to adopt new conventions.
Joe Parrish, a 4th-year computer science student at Brock, is the lead programmer for the Outbreak game simulation. The Outbreak simulation is being developed in the Simulating History Lab at Brock University.
I work on the Outbreak simulation. It's a learning game, and I do a lot of the integration of the art assets and a lot of the programming for it and the software design. Right now we're using Flash, and that's all being coded in ActionScript. And the choice for that was that we needed a game that was small and simple and deliverable over the web. So something that works in a web browser. It could be a game as simply Flash. That's the best option there is right now for that kind of thing.
John Baczynski is a graduate student in the history department at Brock University and is working as the game designer for the Outbreak simulation. In his role as game designer, John helps design, develop, and test game prototypes in the lab.
As a historian and a grad student, I look to the past for new forms of gameplay and interaction. Games are important for learning and representing the past because it's a new form of expression, a new form of representation, as opposed to text-based representations. Games can represent how systems work and how systems function, and it's necessary for the player to understand the system or understand the pattern to be successful at the game.
Andrew McNiven is currently completing his Master's of Education at Brock and is working as the educational consultant on the Outbreak simulation. Andrew's primary responsibility in the Outbreak project is to ensure learning objectives of the simulation are met. Andrew's secondary responsibility is to address the research issues associated with the game.
As a teacher, I see a lot of potential for Outbreak simulations and interactive media in general, because they interest students on a level that they're not used to. As I was describing before, they serve as launch pads. They hook students and they get them interested in seeking out new information. A lot of the techniques that I've learned from working in the lab, I've actually brought into my teaching experience in my placements as a student teacher, and I look forward to bringing that into when I have a full-time job as an educator.
Tom Mitrovic is a 4th-year history student at Brock University and is working on an interactive project to promote the history of Niagara and the bicentennial of the War of 1812. Tom's research is focused on hybrid reality, which would take key historical sites in Niagara and combine them with relevant digital content.
So to date, my research in the lab has been largely focused on academic articles dealing with virtual and hybrid reality, as well as the key people and places in Niagara during the War of 1812. I think the greatest challenge has been finding a way to effectively combine Niagara's very rich and interesting history to the digital world, so that visitors can, in fact, learn about Niagara's history in a very entertaining and immersive fashion.
Tamer Tabit is a Ph.D. candidate at Antwerp University in Belgium and a visiting international scholar to Brock University. Tamer works in the Simulating History Research Lab as an associate researcher and lab manager. Tamer is responsible for documentation, filmmaking, and software solutions in the lab.
There are different projects in the lab. Projects on historical simulations, hybrid reality, and virtual environments, and they all share the same purpose, which is to study the best design practices to create learning games. Virtual worlds are computer-based simulated environments, and users access these environments to engage in different activities. That could be social activities, entertainment, business or academic activities. These worlds have a great learning potential, and here in the lab we're interested in the best design practices to create a learning game that is based in a virtual world. I am also helping in organizing the Interacting with Immersive Worlds Conference 2009 that will be held here at Brock University. We're expecting other researchers from different parts of the world to come together in order to share their ideas and of course to enjoy the beauty and the culture of the Niagara Peninsula.
Through the new way that we can bring together and access data, through the new way that we can communicate with each other, and lastly, through the new way that we can express history through multimedia. Computers are changing and will continue to change the way that history is done. And the Simulating History Research Lab will be a part of that.